Welcome back. Last time we spoke about Stalin's road to government, but being in government does not mean being in power. So today we are going to speak about Stalin's road to power. It was easy for the Bolsheviks to seize power, at least easier than to govern. Take, for example, People's Commissar for the Homeless, Alexandra Kollontai. She was a real revolutionary. She was a tough woman who left her husband and child for the revolution and education. But what could she do? She became a commissar for the homeless, but her commissariat did not have money, did not have the staff. The bureaucracy refused to work with the new People's Commissars. So it was really, really difficult. And each commissar was in the same situation. But in truth, the Bolsheviks, having come to power, were not at first interested in good governance or in governance at all. They were waiting for the world revolution. They were absolutely sure that the world revolution is just round the corner. This is the poster glory to the world revolution. So the Bolsheviks promoted revolution both at home and abroad, and this was their main task. Actually, the first decree that they issued was Decree on Peace. And this is how soldiers at the front are being told that now they can just go home. Of course, the wording of the decree was wonderful. The call was for the unconditional peace, and the soldiers were really happy they could go home. But what it meant was that the Germans quickly moved forward. And here you can see the map with huge territories of the former Russian Empire, including Ukraine, Finland, Poland, occupied by the Germans. The new Soviet Republic had to sign a humiliating Treaty of Brest-Litovsk in March 1918. The next decree was Decree on Land. And here again you can see that the peasants are listening very carefully and very intently. They are trying to understand what this decree will bring them. More than 90% of land was already in their hands. Okay, the decree increased that proportion to 100%. And also added the land which belonged to monasteries and churches and so on. But in reality, the matter was much more complicated than that, because the villages started to grab the land, to loot the land, including not only from the remaining landlords, but also from one another. One village fought against the other village over the same piece of land, and also the peasants tried to redistribute land. They tried to redistribute the land of the richer peasants, the kulaks, in their own favor. Basically, the decree on land returned the village to the same situation as it was before the Stolypin reform. Also, the decree announced the nationalization of land, but at that moment it somehow did not register with the peasants that they lost their private property on land. The next decree was the Declaration of Rights of Working and Exploited People. Here you can see the workers of the Putilov factory with their factory committee, because one of the items that the decree promulgated was that the industries were to be ruled by the committees elected by the workers. It was workers' control of the factories. It was a step to nationalization. In fact, in many cases, it meant nationalization because that's how the workers perceived it. Simultaneously, Banks were nationalized, transport was nationalized, forests, water, agricultural resources, mineral resources. And again, the decree repeated that there would be no private property on land. The decree also introduced labor duty, first on the former wealthy. And, the workers greeted it. It was new, it was wonderful, and everybody seemed happy. But the results of this measure, which was clearly a very populist measure, was that only 87 factories in Petrograd actually managed. The rest of them stopped producing. Some of the equipment was sold because the workers sold whatever they had in order to gain some food, because the food was not supplied, because the railways didn't work. So that was the situation as the result of these first decrees. Happiness and then destruction. Because the food could not be supplied, the Bolsheviks had to start confiscating crops hidden by the peasants. This is one of the pictures where you can see how it was done. It is obviously people from a town or a city have found where the peasants were hiding their grain, and grain, of course, was needed to grow their harvests next year or just for food, but that did not matter. What mattered was that the cities and towns had to be fed, the workers had to be fed. Now, there was no way that it could happen even with the confiscation of crops. So the population of the towns and cities moved to the villages to barter food for whatever they could bring. This whole system was Cold War communism, and it continued for several years after 1917. To help the revolution abroad, the Bolsheviks established the Communist International in March 1919. Here is the Soviet poster of the Communist International, Proletarians of all countries unite. As you can see, this worker is carrying a torch, and there is a flame behind him. This is the flame of the revolution. The Bolsheviks did not actually conceal their aim of setting the world on fire. This is a line from the poem of Russian poet Blok. To the sorrow of bourgeoisie, we shall set the world on fire. The Comintern, this is the first Comintern Congress. You can see a very sort of modest gathering, but it was going to rule the world. It tried to help the communist parties all throughout the world. All the communist parties were members of the Communist International. And they got the money, they got the every other assistance that they needed, as long as the Bolsheviks could help them. But they also tried to undermine capitalist countries in any way they could. Of course, the Bolshevik measures were very popular, but still they could not hope to avoid the civil war and the intervention. They expected it. So the way to cope with it was to set up, already in December 1917, extraordinary commission to fight counter-revolution. This body, the abbreviation for it was called ЧК, and this is how it was known to the Russians, and this is how it became known abroad. This is Felix Dzerzhinsky with his comrades from the ЧК, and I want to quote what he said soon after heading this commission. "Do not think that I shall seek revolutionary justice. We are now not in need of justice. It is war now, a fight to the finish."